Okay, this will be continuing on consciousness of chapter 10. So you've had an opportunity now to watch several of the videos that I left for you on Wednesday. And we left off as far as classroom discussion, where we were going to start talking about how consciousness and actions go hand in hand. Pretty much studies have been able to show that brain activity is responsible for the movement, which starts before a conscious decision is even made. So when people report how they're making movements, your brain has already made that decision for you. When you go to clap, for example, your brain has thought that out and thought about the process of how you do it, and it starts you to clapping. Okay? So there are reasons that people, that we might doubt that people can accurately state the time that a conscious decision starts. But spontaneous movements, as well as decisions behind them, they develop gradually. It's not something sudden. It's not, your brain don't automatically have it. It's something that's developed. So think of it and imagine yourself driving, uh, and then suddenly a deer darts out. Okay, your mind is already working. You swerved immediately to avoid it. In contrast, though, if you decide you need to get into the left lane to make a turn, you might move slowly. So the gradual spontaneous movements are going to depend on a set of your brain areas, which is the basal ganglia. And what happens is it contributes much less when you act in response to a stimulus. So just remember, though there are skeptics involved with how decisions are made consciously, that voluntarily decisions are gradual, they're not sudden. It's something that we learn and it becomes automatic for us. The brain starts to work quicker each time we do it. All right, so what's the purpose of our consciousness anyway? Some theorists have argued that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, that being an accidental byproduct with no purpose at all. But if the consciousness does serve a purpose, what might that purpose be? There's one hypothesis that would say that consciousness is thought of as a way of rehearsing possibilities for our future actions. So when you do something, you might think, well, that didn't go well. What could I have done differently? Then what would what would have happened? Oh, I see. So pretty much what I'm saying is the next time you're in a situation like this, you might say or do in a way that your conscious thinking modifies the behavior for the future. All right, so let's now start thinking about how we sleep and how we dream. Within this module, we're going to start talking about circadian rhythms and how it affects our level of alertness as well as other functions in our bodies. We'll talk about the differences between morning folks and evening folks like myself, uh, as well as talk about jet lag and how shift work impacts our lives. We'll look at different brain mechanisms that help to control the circadian rhythms, as well as learn the different functions of sleep. We'll start talking about the stages of sleep as well as trying to understand what rapid eye movement is. We'll look at the sleep disorders such as insomnia, narcolepsy, um, as well as look at some theories on dreams. So humans, we have mechanisms that helps us for activities that's throughout the day as well as when we sleep at night. And just like other animals, we generate what we call a circadian rhythm. This is a rhythm of activity and inactivity that's about a 24-hour period. So it's the rising and setting of the sun that'll help give us cues to be able to reset our rhythm and how we generate those rhythms ourselves. So the circadian rhythm is going to control more than just sleep and wake, okay? Over the course of a day, Pretty much it'll help you with your hunger, it'll help with thirst, it'll help with how you eliminate like urine, as your blood pressure, how aware you are, your body temperature, as well as your mood. There are some people who have genes that actually alter their circadian rhythms. And pretty much with them, it's causing them to have, rather than a 24-hour cycle, they have a 23-hour cycle. So they get sleepy early in the evening and then they wake up early. Those are those morning people. So, morning people and evening people, what are the differences? With morning people, they wake up really easy and they become alert quickly. Pretty much the earlier it is in the morning at sunrise, the better they are productively. Whereas evening people, like myself, it takes us a little longer to warm up to the morning. And most times I'd rather be asleep in the morning. And I do the best work in late afternoon and evening. So with morning people, they have some advantages, of course, in many ways, like for work and school. Because they're more alert in the morning time, they should be doing really well in those environments. On average, morning type students maintain attention better in the morning than they do uh, in the afternoon. They take tests better in the morning. They'll get better grades with those courses that they're taking at 8:30 a.m. rather than at 3 p.m. To 5 p.m., for example, compared to those evening types that has those same cognitive abilities as well as motivation. Now, let me flip it though. A person in the evening, if they're taking night classes, would have similar results as morning people do when they take morning classes. One thing to note though, male evening types have an advantage. They tend to be more extroverted as well as have a more active social life, and they're probably going to have a lot of partners sexually. Most young adults, though, they're either going to be evening people or intermediate, whereas most people over age 65, they become morning people. If you ask someone at what time they like to go to bed, when they have no obligations, and their mean answer would shift to later and later during the teenage years. So it may reach 1 or 2 a.m. at 20 and then start reversing itself and slowly and steadily decline over the decades. So the fact that the trend continues gradually over a lifetime, it allows us to know that this actually has some type of biological component attached. So just remember, people vary in their circadian rhythms. There are people with 24-hour clocks for the most part, but there are some with a 23-hour clock. Okay, and those people arouse quickly. They can reach their peak of awareness early. Those are our morning folks. Others increase alertness more slowly, and they reach their peak late afternoon or evenings. That is the evening folks. Young people, they're either going to be evening people or they'll be in between. And the majority of people, once they reach over age 65, they start to become morning people. Now, let's look at this. This figure here has got us looking at how people may suffer from jet lag when they're traveling east and when they travel west. So if you travel across the different time zones, pretty much your internal rhythm is going to go out of whack because of the new environment. And this is how you start to experience jet lag. And for those who don't know what jet lag is, because you never had the opportunity to experience it, it's a period of discomfort and inefficiency while your internal clock is trying to snap back into it because within their new surroundings. So people, they'll find themselves easier to adjust when they fly west because it gets earlier than when they do where they go to bed later than when they're flying east, and then their body they lost hours so much, so they wind up having to go to bed earlier than anticipated. If you fly west, your circadian rhythm shifts to a bit later each day until it allows yourself to catch up. Whereas if you fly east, your rhythm is going to be a bit earlier each day. So it's like, think about when we have the time change. I know I struggle with this, the time change in the fall and in the spring. Fall for me is a great time because I get, it's like I gain that hour. I have an hour to sleep a little more. Whereas in the spring it springs up and I lost that hour. Same type of thought there. All right. So there are businesses though that they utilize what we call shift work. How many of y'all have part-time jobs and those jobs have you working shifts? Y'all know the shifts, either that midnight to 8, which I hope none of you have, or 8 to 4, or 4 to midnight. And you know what? There are a few people who want to work regularly on the midnight to 8, me being one of them. But shifting, many companies rotate their workers among those three type of shifts. And for some, it might be the 8 to 4. Some of it is 7 to 3, 3 to 10, 10 to 7, which that makes it worse to me. But what happens is the employers pretty much they can help it ease some of this burden that workers would have in two ways. The first way is when they kind of change up workers from one shift to another, they should be transferring them to a later shift. That is, if somebody is working 8 to 4, then the shift needs to move to the 4 to 12. Think of again, if we were talking about jet lag and stuff, think of that traveling west instead of going from midnight to 8, because that's like traveling east. Secondly, the companies, the employers, what they can do is help workers on a night shift by providing better lighting that would be more like looking at sunlight. So the brighter it is, the better it is to help a person to get uh, accommodated to that time span. Now, circadian rhythms, when we're talking about sleep and wakefulness, is generated within the brain through a tiny structure that's known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Yes, that is not a fun, easy word to say. But although the suprachiasmatic nucleus generates a circadian rhythm, pretty much light resets the internal clock. Think about when you're sleeping and light hits you, it's like your body automatically knows it needs to stir and start waking up. Unless you're a person who's in reverse mode like myself. Light tells me it's time to lay down. But because I know I have to work in a day, I've learned to wake up. But pretty much what it does is it's causing you to wake up more or less within the synchrony of that sunlight. The suprachiasmatic nucleus will exert control partly by regulating the pineal gland secretions of the hormone melatonin. And now this is important for not only your circadian rhythm, but it's going to be for many species the annual rhythms of reproduction, bears with hibernation, and so on. So ordinarily, the pineal gland will start releasing melatonin in humans 2 or 3 hours before bedtime. Why do we need to sleep anyway? Well, researchers identified several benefits to sleep. Biggest one, or the simplest way to say it, is it helps us to save energy. It allows us to strengthen our learning and memory in several different ways. And it depends on the type of learning that you do. So when you learn something, more or less what happens is your memory start improves if you're able to go to sleep within the next 3 hours, and it'll deteriorate after a sleepless night. So when you cramming and you think you can cram all night and go straight into a test, a lot of times you're not retaining all that information you've been reading. With a good night's sleep, it'll also improve that learning the next day as well. People who suffer when they don't get enough sleep, they're what we call sleep deprived, and more times than not, they'll become more vulnerable to illness. You might slip easier into depression as well as other type of mental illnesses, and you wind up suffering these different lapses of attention. You're not able to maintain your or level of awareness or being alert. And that can sometimes make a person impulsive and lapse in ethical behavior. So let's look at the stages of sleep. Okay, now when we talk about the stages of sleep, back in the 50s, 1950s, French and American researchers pretty much they discovered a stage of sleep that we call paradoxical sleep or rapid eye movement, which is REM. Now, with REM sleep, this is going to be characterized by rapid eye movements. While your eyes is closed, you ever notice somebody's eyes look like they're jumping? That's rapid eye movement. And it's a high level of brain activity, as well as when your muscles are relaxed. So REM sleep is paradoxical because it's light in some ways and deep in other ways. Light in the sense of the brain is active and it's working, and the body's heart rate, the breathing rate, temperature, it's going to be up and down. It's going to be fluctuating. And it's deep because your larger muscles in your body that helps with posture, locomotion, they become deeply relaxed. So now you understand why it's called paradoxical sleep. Adults who are awakened during REM sleep have reported that they've been dreaming about 85 to 90% of the time. Whereas those who are awakened during non-REM sleep, they report that they only dream 50 to 60% of the time. So this figure here is looking at different sleep waves through an EEG, okay, which is an electroencephalograph. I love having to pronounce these. But what that does is it measures and amplifies tiny electrical charges that's on the scalp, and it reflects patterns of your brain activities. So those who do research in sleep, what they do is they combine the EEG, that's what I'm going to call it from here on out, and measure it with a simultaneous measure of your eye movements to help produce a polysomnograph. Now, a sleeper that's within the first stage of sleep, their eyes are near almost motionless, and the EEG shows really short, choppy waves that would indicate a fair amount of brain activity going on. But now, as you get into sleep a little more, you'll start progressing in what we call stage 2, then there's stage 3, and then there's stage 4. Now, these stages, they differ in the length of the waves, of the slower waves. So with stage 2, this has the fewest, and then stage 4 will have the most. And these stages will kind of show the synchrony among the neurons, which would be related to decreased brain activity. So in stage 2, it's going to be marked by what we call sleep spindles. That's waves of activity that's about 12 to 14 per second, which will result in an exchange of information that's going between your cerebral cortex and the thalamus. Sleep spindles are going to be important for your ability to store memory, and it helps in the improvement of memory that often occurs after sleep, depending on the amount of sleep spindles that's happening. As your sleep progresses from stage 2 into 3 and 4, then it gradually will go back to 3 and then 2, and then you'll go into REM sleep. So the EEG in REM sleep resembles that of stage 1, but now your eyes are more steady. At the end of your REM sleep, what happens is those cycles will repeat itself again. You'll go back into stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and then back to 3, 2, and REM. In a healthy young adult, this lasts 90 to 100 minutes on average. So this sleep cycle from going from stage 1 to stage 4, then back to REM. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1 REM. Lasts approximately 100 minutes on average. Now, I mentioned sleep disorders, and a lot of us have these sleep disorders. One that we're looking at right now on this slide is insomnia, and pretty much insomnia means lack of sleep. Specifically speaking, insomnia is just not enough sleep for the person to feel rested the next day. And with insomnia, it has causes that includes noise, worrying, indigestion. You have up and down temperatures. A lot of times there'll be a use of alcohol or caffeine, and medical or psychological disorders that would be associated. When a person has persistent insomnia, they need to be treated by a physician. However, doing the following can also help occasionally with minor insomnia. So one thing you can try to do is keep a regular time schedule for going to bed as well as waking up each day. Get your body in a routine. You're going to want to spend some time in the sunlight to kind of help your circadian rhythms. Minimize the exposure to TV and to the computers and technology at least 3 hours before bedtime if all possible. Allow your body to get adjusted and ready to go to sleep. Of course, you want to avoid caffeine, nicotine, and any other kind of stimulants, especially at night, 3 to 4 hours before bed. Do not think that alcohol or tranquilizers are going to be the says-all be-all to help you fall asleep. Because after using it repeatedly, you won't be able to sleep without them. You'll become addicted. Another thing you might want to do is keep your bedroom cool and quiet. Get some exercise in daily if you can, but not close to bedtime, because in reality, exercise actually is supposed to help provide you with energy. So you don't want to do it too late at night. You want to kind of do it, I'd say 5, 6 hours before bedtime, if at all. Now, sleep apnea and narcolepsy. When I say apnea, what basically it means is you're not breathing. People with sleep apnea, they fail to breathe for a minute or more, and then they'll wake up gasping for breath. Sleep apnea is going to be the most common, particularly in obese middle-aged men whose breathing passages become narrower than usual. So when they're awake, what happens is they'll compensate by breathing frequently and vigorously, but they're not able to keep it up, this pattern, when they fall asleep. Some treatments that's included would be to lose the weight, avoid alcohol and tranquilizers before bedtime. At bedtime, you're also going to want to prop yourself up a little bit if you do suffer from sleep apnea. Help keep the passageway open. Surgery can remove tissue to help widen the airways, and there's some people who actually use a device. You might have heard of CPAP machines. Basically what it does is pumps air into the mask that would cover your nose and mouth while you're sleeping and force the person to breathe. Now, the next sleep disorder to talk about will be narcolepsy. And people with narcolepsy, what happens to them, all of a sudden they just want to sleep out of nowhere. It's just abrupt and suddenly. They also experiences attacks of muscle weakness or paralysis, and occasionally they go into a dreamlike state while they're awake. So, a combination of stimulant and antidepressant medications would help maintain the wakefulness during the day for a person narcoleptic, and then it helps to block those attacks of muscle weakness for them. So, some other sleep experiences to think about. Any, you ever sleep talk? Now, there's times when I think I'm at exhaustion or troubling times if I've had any anxiety or difficulty throughout a day in which sleep talking occurs for me. And it's a common experiences that might be for some people just a grunted word, whereas others can hold a full-fledged conversation. And there's a lot of people who talk in their sleep more often than they even know it because they don't remember sleep talking, and it's usually no one gets to hear them. So with sleep talking, the most common time it's going to happen is during stage 2 sleep, but really it can happen in all the stages. The next one is sleepwalking. Now with sleepwalking, this usually runs families. There's a question of a genetic link because it's mostly within children though, and it mainly happens during stage 4 sleep. Some adults might sleepwalk also. Mostly, though, that's going to be during the first half of the night's sleep and not when they're dreaming. They'll appear clumsy. They're going to have these purposeless movements, and there'll be very little responsiveness to the surroundings. Sleepwalking do occur though with the motor cortex, and then there's few in other areas that's going to be active during this time, while the rest of the brain's kind of still sleeping. Now, one thing I do want to say with you, a person who's sleepwalking, just guide them back to bed. Don't try to shake them up and wake them up. Just politely guide them back to bed, and generally speaking, because they are already asleep, hopefully they will stay still. Now, lucid dreaming. This is one of those examples in which part of the brain is awake while the other part is asleep. With lucid dreaming, what happens is that there's periods of increased activity, and to quantify it, we say it's about approximately 40 hertz cycles per second that's going on in your frontal lobe and your temporal cortex. Okay, and it's less arousal within the rest of the brain. Some people, though, they do have a prolonged creepy crawly sensation going on in their legs, and it's accompanied with repetitive leg movements that's strong enough to wake a person up, particularly during the first half of the night. So this condition is known as a periodic limb movement disorder. The next one we're talking about is night terrors. Now, night terrors causes some people to awaken screaming and sweating, their hearts racing, and sometimes arms be flailing, you be pounding and hitting the walls. Night terrors occurs, generally speaking, during stage 3 or stage 4 sleep. However, it won't be occurring during REM, and their dream content, if any, is usually going to be simple, like just one simple little image. Now, common usage implies that when we dream, it's happy. Like, think of Cinderella, a Disney movie like Cinderella. The dream is a wish that your heart wants to make. Martin Luther King, famous "I Have a Dream" speech, described a wonderful future. However, most of the dream content is unpleasant, like falling, being chased, or being unable to do something. Although dreams are bizarre, most are similar to what we think about every day. For example, adolescents, they seldom dream about the opposite sex, but later adolescents, a teenager, they do. However, we do not dream about everything we do in daily life. People seldom dream about what they read or how much they wrote, um, using a computer or watching television. People who become blind because of damage to the visual cortex, they lose visual dreaming as well as visual imagery. But people who experience eye damage after age 5 to 7, they'll continue to have those visual dreams, although the frequency of the visual dreams declines over time. Dreaming takes on a different shape in terms of auditory. There's an auditory dream that'll occur. People who are born blind or who became blind in early childhood, again, has no visual imagery of their dreams, but they have those sounds, they have the touches, the smells, and the tastes that help to create the dreams. Now, Freud, if you don't know, is the founder of psychoanalysis, and more or less, he maintained that dreams reveal the unconscious thoughts and motivations as well as conflicts. So, to be able to understand a dream, Freud felt that one must probe into the hidden meanings. Each dream has a manifest content, and manifest content is that appears on the surface. And then there's latent content, those hidden areas of the dream experience, and it's usually represented symbolically. In terms of modern theories of dreaming, theorists describe dreaming as a kind of a thinking that would occur under conditions of low sensory input, and then there's no voluntary control of the thinking. Some terminology I want you to make sure you have a good understanding of is activation synthesis theory of dreams. And this is when the dreams occur because the cortex is kind of haphazard or lazy activity going on that happens during REM sleep, plus whatever kind of stimuli that might make the sense organs kick in a little bit. And it's best to make the sense of it does it to make sense of whatever the activity is going on at the time. Neurocognitive theory, on the other hand, is where dreaming is just about thinking, just like daydreaming or wandering of the mind. It's usually under these particular conditions, that being reduced sensory stimulation. Like right now, at this time of listening to my voice, as you look at this lecture, you're probably at a reduced sensory stimulation, and you're probably thinking about something other than Dr. Kearns-Cooper's lecture. But it's impacting the brain's primary sensory areas. Reduced activity will be occurring within your prefrontal cortex. And here, though, this is the important area because this is the executive area, I think, in that it's important for our planning as well as helping with our work and memory. There will be a loss of voluntary control of thinking. It wanders. And then there's enough activity within other areas that includes face recognition as well as motivation and emotions. I will be stopping here. When we get back together, we will start talking about hypnosis. Have a great weekend. Stay well, and hope to see you next week.